Hello, my name is Luna. I live in a little cedar house just outside of Ashland, Oregon, far enough from town that the stars still show themselves at night, but close enough to hear traffic when the wind blows a certain way. The winters here are long, and the silence even longer. It's not the kind of silence that comforts you. It's the kind that presses against your windows, that creeps in with the morning fog and stays through your second cup of coffee. The kind that makes you remember things you'd rather forget. My husband Thomas died 5 years ago, right in the middle of December. A stroke. It was quick, the doctors said. Like that was supposed to make it easier. We had just put up the Christmas lights. I left them on for 3 weeks after the funeral, blinking alone in the cold, like some kind of misplaced hope. Eventually, I turned them off. I haven't hung them since. My daughter, Melissa, lives up in Portland now. She's got a job in tech and a fiancé named Eric. They just bought a house modern, with quartz countertops and one of those voice-activated thermostats. It's all very efficient, very adult. I've only been there once. It smelled like lavender and ambition. Melissa doesn't call often. Once a month. Maybe twice, if there's a holiday coming up. But I understand. She's busy. She has a life. That's what we raise them for. Right, to go live. My own days are quieter than they used to be. I wake up with the sun most mornings, and bake banana bread if I have ripe ones. Cinnamon rolls, if I feel nostalgic. I read the Ashland Tribune with coffee that's gone cold before I finish it. Sometimes, I water the lavender bushes lining the porch, even though they've been stubborn and bare since last fall. I talk to myself more than I should. I pretend the mail carrier knows my name. I check the mailbox every afternoon even when I know nothing's coming. I guess some habits aren't about hope. They're just about rhythm. 2 weeks ago, Melissa called. The first thing she said was, "Mom, I'm getting married," she sounded thrilled. Breathless. Like she'd just run through a meadow of wildflowers and landed in a perfect life. I smiled when I heard her voice. I always do. She told me the wedding would be in Bend, at a place called Cedarlight Conservatory, a glass-walled garden venue that overlooked a lake. It's very modern but still timeless. She said, "Eric's mom found it. It's perfect." I said it sounded beautiful. I said I'd be there. Of course. She said they were keeping things small, elegant, and simple. I waited for her to ask about my schedule, about what weekends worked best for me. But she didn't. Instead, there was a pause. Then she added, "Don't worry about anything. Mom, we've got it all handled. I offered to bake something for the rehearsal dinner. Maybe the lemon pie she used to love." She chuckled. "That's sweet. Mom, but we're doing catering." Her voice wasn't unkind. It was just distant, like she was reading off a checklist and I wasn't on it. After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the phone in my hand, the screen already dark. I felt something in that moment, something small and sharp and buried. Not kite pine, not kite sadness, just exclusion, like I'd been gently moved out of the frame. But still, I stayed hopeful. I pulled out the navy blue dress I'd been saving for a special day, the one with soft pleats and 3/4 sleeves. I ironed my cardigan, the one with pearl buttons Thomas always said made me look like an old Hollywood star. I polished the earrings Melissa gave me for my 60th. I cleaned the porch. Even trimmed the hydrangeas that hadn't bloomed in 2 years. Because part of me, some soft, ridiculous part, still believed that this wedding might stitch us back together. That maybe, for one day, we'd remember how to be mother and daughter again. But some silences don't wait for the reception. Some distances start long before the aisle. And I was beginning to learn that the loudest heartbreaks don't always come with slamming doors. Sometimes, they show up with soft voices and polite smiles. And sometimes, the deepest kind of lonely is the kind no one else notices. The Cedar Light Conservatory was beautiful. Just like Melissa said it would be. Glass ceilings framed by iron beams, with tall white chairs set in perfect rows, all overlooking a still lake. That looked like it hadn't moved in hours. I arrived early. That's a habit I haven't managed to break even after all these years of people not noticing. I wore the navy dress I'd pressed the night before, paired with the earrings Melissa once gave me, and that cardigan Thomas loved. I had even baked a small batch of sugar cookies just in case there might be a casual table for snacks before the dinner. There wasn't. At the entrance, a young woman wearing a headset and bright lipstick greeted me like I was a guest at a fundraiser. She handed me a name tag, Luna Evans, printed in cursive on a plain white sticker. I looked at it for a moment. No ribbon. No title. Nothing that said Mother of the Bride. Just my name. Like I was a +1 to my own daughter's life. I pinned it on anyway. What else was I supposed to do? Inside, the music was already playing something classical. Elegant. Impersonal. People milled around with champagne flutes and tiny hors d'oeuvres that looked like they belonged in a magazine. Not on real plates. I didn't recognize most of them. But I smiled anyway. I always do. Melissa was at the front, radiant in her ivory dress, laughing with Eric and a group of people I'd never met. She looked happy. Truly. And I wanted to hold on to that. But when her eyes swept across the room, they slid right past me like I was wallpaper. One of the wedding coordinators waved me toward a table in the back. Table 12. I walked slowly, hoping maybe it was a mistake, that someone would call out, "Oh no! You're up front with family." But no one did. My place card just said Luna. Not even my last name this time. No mother. No family of the bride. Just Luna. I sat between a man who owned a string of golf carts in Nevada and a woman from Vermont who raised alpacas. They were pleasant, but neither had ever met Melissa. They spent most of dinner talking across me. Not to me. During the toasts, Eric's best man made a joke about college parties. Melissa's best friend cried through her speech. Then came her father-in-law, warm, confident, nostalgic. Melissa smiled through all of it. Then someone asked loudly, casually, "When is the bride's mom going to speak?" Melissa laughed and said, "Maybe later before moving on to the next glass of champagne." She never came back to that question. The dinner was plated and neat. I had the lemon chicken. It was dry. The butter roll sat untouched. The dessert was a tiny tart that looked beautiful and tasted like a whisper. I took one bite and left it there, pretending I was too full. Melissa never came to my table. Not once. She danced with Eric, then with his mother, then with someone's uncle. I watched her twirl in the lights while I fixed the hem of my dress for the third time. Even though it wasn't crooked, I smiled at the photographer when he passed me. Twice. His camera never lifted. By the end of the night, Table 12 was mostly empty. People had filtered out quietly, their conversations trailing behind them like perfume. I folded my napkin slowly, slid it under my glass, and waited for someone to say goodbye. No one did. So I stood up, walked out through the back, and drove home in silence. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even speak. I just drove. And when I pulled into my driveway 2 hours later, I sat in the car for a long time, staring out at the porch light I'd left on just in case. Not for safety, but for something I couldn't name, because that night, something shifted in me. A seam came loose. A silence that had followed me for years finally stopped walking behind me and stepped into the room. It sat beside me in that car. And it whispered something I didn't want to hear but couldn't ignore. You don't belong in her story anymore. It was 6 days after the wedding when Melissa called. Her voice was light, almost rehearsed. Hey, Mom. Are you free Thursday evening? Eric's out with friends. I thought we could have dinner. Just the two of us. I said yes before she could even finish. No hesitation. No questions. Just yes. Because even after everything, after the name tag, the corner table, the silence, I still wanted to believe that maybe she saw it too. The distance, the wound, and maybe now. She wanted to start stitching it closed. I pulled out the old oatmeal cookie recipe Thomas used to love and baked a fresh batch. Melissa never liked them much. But I wasn't thinking about her taste. I was thinking about memories, about comfort, about showing up with something made by hand. The drive to Lake Oswego took a little over 2 hours. Melissa's new neighborhood was lined with boxy townhomes and symmetrical flower beds. Every house looked like it had been built from the same blueprint, tidy, calculated, curated. Even the mailboxes matched. Her porch light clicked on automatically as I stepped up the front walk. She opened the door with a smile quick. Polite. She gave me a half hug. The kind where your shoulders don't quite touch. Then waved me inside. The kitchen was spotless. Too spotless. There was a bottle of wine already uncorked. 2 glasses half filled. And a table set with cloth napkins and gold-rimmed salad plates. But there was no smell of food. No clinking pots. No timer beeping on the stove. And then I saw it at the center of the table. Right between the 2 plates. A neatly stacked set of legal papers, clipped with a binder clip. And a navy blue pen laid diagonally across the top. Melissa motioned for me to sit. She poured herself more wine and complimented the cookies. Smell amazing, she said. Even though she hadn't opened the foil, her tone was smooth. Practiced. A version of her I'd never quite met before. She gestured toward the papers with a soft smile. So, this is just a standard form. Power of attorney. Durable. Totally normal. Eric's parents just did one for his brother. It's smart. You know, to have things ready just in case. I nodded slowly, staring down at the stack. The top page was thick with bolded language. I didn't need a law degree to feel what it meant. Financial control. Property access. Medical authority. Immediate effect. It didn't say daughter. It said agent. It didn't say love. It said authorization. She said there was no pressure. But the pen was already uncapped. The plates in front of us remained empty. There was no dinner. Just wine. And paper. And a quiet request wearing a friendly tone. I picked up the packet and said I'd take it home. That I'd look it over carefully. She nodded quickly. Too quickly. Her eyes flicking from the papers to my face and back again. She didn't argue. She didn't need to. The silence between us filled the room louder than any voice. The rest of the evening was small talk. Weather. A new fence the neighbors put up. Some show on streaming that I'd never heard of. She never asked what I'd been watching. When it was time to go, she walked me to the door and gave me the same light hug. My arms barely moved. Hers didn't either. Back in the car. I didn't start the engine right away. The cookies were still on the passenger seat. Untouched. The porch light behind me shut off after 60 seconds efficient. Automated. Just like everything else. That night, I didn't change out of my shoes when I got home. I sat on the couch with my coat still zipped. Hands resting in my lap like they belonged to someone else. The house was silent. Even the clock in the kitchen wasn't ticking. And I remember sitting there thinking, this wasn't dinner. This was a transaction. And somehow, somewhere along the way, I had been redefined from mother to liability. That realization didn't break me, but it did something else, something deeper. It made me remember who I used to be, and who I no longer wanted to become. That night, I didn't sleep. Not really. I lay in bed with the lights off, coat still hanging over the bedroom chair, the legal packet sitting untouched on the nightstand, its edges sharp in the moonlight. Like it was daring me to open it again. But I didn't. Instead, I stared at the ceiling, counting the grooves in the wooden beams above me, listening to the way the house breathed at night. Soft creaks, cold corners, familiar loneliness, around dry I stood up, pulled on my sweater, and padded barefoot down the stairs. My knees ached with each step, the kind of ache that comes from more than just age. I turned on the basement light. It flickered once, then held steady. The air down there was cooler, heavier. The scent of dust and old wood filled my chest. At the far end, tucked behind the water heater and a sagging shelf of Christmas decorations, sat an old green filing cabinet with a brass handle. It hadn't been opened in years. Thomas had told me once back when he still fixed things himself, still carried a tape measure in his back pocket, that if anything ever happened to him, I'd find what I needed down here. I hadn't looked. Not then. Not until now. I pulled open the bottom drawer. Inside was a small, rust-edged metal box. The key was taped beneath the lid. Typical Thomas. Always 2 steps ahead. The lock clicked open, and what I found inside stopped my breath. Everything was perfectly organized. Neatly labeled folders, color-coded tabs, a sealed envelope on top with my name written in his handwriting, Luna. Not sweetheart. Not darling. Just my name. Steady and intentional. I sat down on the concrete floor and opened the letter. It wasn't long. A paragraph. Maybe 2. If you're reading this, he wrote, it means you needed to remember what you already have. I know you wouldn't ask for help, even if you needed it. So I made sure you wouldn't have to. He went on to explain how he'd been slowly building a financial safety net in my name. Not in secret, but in quiet. Mutual funds, index portfolios, a rental property in Santa Fe, and a long-term annuity plan he never once mentioned aloud. The total just over $5 million. I blinked, closed the folder, opened it again, thought maybe I was tired, or dreaming, or reading something meant for someone else. But no, it was real. The numbers, the names, the accounts, all in my name. I didn't cry. I didn't feel joy either. It was something else, a kind of gravity. Like holding a truth too big for the room. It wasn't the money that struck me. It was the foresight, the love written in preparation, the understanding that someday I might be standing right here, feeling exactly like this. He hadn't just given me a safety net. He'd given me back my power. I sat there on the basement floor for a long time. The metal box opened beside me. The files fanned across my lap like a blueprint I never asked for, but suddenly needed. My hands trembled not from fear, but from the weight of realization. Thomas had seen something I hadn't. He'd seen how the world could shrink a woman down to her usefulness. How silence could replace gratitude. How a mother's heart could become a ledger in someone else's story. He had known, and in his quiet, practical way, he had loved me through it. When I finally stood, knees stiff and joints sore, I didn't feel weak. I felt armed. I felt chosen. I turned off the basement light, walked back upstairs, and laid the sealed documents on the kitchen table next to the untouched cookie tray and Melissa's legal packet. Two worlds, side by side. One built on quiet protection, the other on subtle control. And for the first time since Thomas passed, I didn't feel like a woman drifting through someone else's plan. I felt like someone who had just remembered she could draw her own map. It took me 3 days to decide what to do next, not because I was uncertain, but because I needed the silence to mean something. I didn't want to act from anger. I didn't want revenge or some dramatic declaration. I just wanted clarity, ownership, a clean line between what was mine and what I no longer owed. I found Joanne's number on the back of a birthday card from years ago, tucked inside a drawer filled with rubber bands, coupons that had long expired, and 2 spare keys I could no longer identify. Joanne Bailey had once been a respected estate lawyer in Medford before she retired to grow lavender and write short stories no one ever read. We hadn't spoken since Thomas's funeral. She and her husband had been our neighbors back then, kind. Reserved. Always showing up with a pie they didn't expect returned. When I called, she answered on the second ring. "Luna Evans," she said. "I was wondering when you'd show up again." I didn't explain much, just said I needed to talk. She didn't ask questions. Just said, "Come by at 2. I'll have tea and something stronger." Her home was warm, full of overstuffed bookshelves and embroidered pillows that carried messages like, "You are allowed to leave the table when love is no longer being served." There were lemon bars on a floral plate and a yellow notepad already open beside a silver pen. I handed her the envelope from Thomas and said, "He made sure I'd be okay. I just don't want anyone undoing it." Joanne read every page like a woman who had spent her life reading between the lines. Her eyes moved steadily, her lips pressing together each time a clause gave her pause. When she finished, she closed the folder and looked at me, not with pity, not with sympathy, but with a firmness I hadn't seen in years. "You have more power than you think," she said. "The investments are real. The accounts are secure. But they won't stay that way if you let someone else write your ending." She asked if I wanted to establish a trust. I nodded. "Who do you want to name as your successor?" she asked. I paused, then answered, "No one. Not yet. Maybe never." She nodded again. No judgment. No raised eyebrows. Just understanding. We got to work. Over 2 afternoons. We transferred everything into a private, revocable living trust. Under my full control. Joanne layered in protections. No access without dual medical evaluation, proving diminished capacity. 0 authority granted without my explicit written consent. Clear clauses, blocking third-party interference. When the final papers were drawn, Joanne slid them toward me with a new pen. I signed slowly, not out of hesitation, but out of intention. Every stroke of ink felt like a boundary being drawn not just on paper, but inside me, a line between who I had been and who I was becoming. When I finished, she smiled. Not bad for a woman. People thought would just go along quietly. We laughed. Soft and short. Like women who had spent a lifetime swallowing things they should have said out loud. She handed me the final folder. Thick and sealed. Hide it somewhere obvious to you, but invisible to them. That night, I tucked it behind a box of dishwasher pods under the sink somewhere. No one would think to look. Because no one ever asks about the things you use every day. The air felt different driving home. Not lighter. Not happier. Just cleaner. Like something had been lifted. Not by someone else, but by me. When I got inside, I walked through the house without turning on the lights. I didn't need to. I knew where everything was now, literally and metaphorically. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like someone's aging mother. I didn't feel like a problem to be solved or a detail to be managed. I felt like a woman with a spine, with edges, with choice. And that, I realized, was more powerful than love given blindly. It was love redirected back to myself. The text came on a Monday. Hey mom, wanna try dinner again? Just the two of us this time. No papers. No pressure. I stared at the screen for a few seconds longer than I meant to. Then typed a simple reply. Sure. I didn't tell her I wouldn't be coming alone. Joanne parked 1 block over, tucked behind a line of maples that were just starting to bud. We'd agreed she wouldn't come in unless I needed her. She wasn't there to fight, just to witness. Just in case. I wasn't nervous. Not this time. I'd already learned what it meant to be still without being soft. Melissa opened the door wearing a slate gray sweater and a carefully pleasant smile. The house smelled like roasted vegetables and garlic-like effort. Like a stage had been set and the script was ready. There was bread on the table this time. Real plates. Even music soft jazz playing from a speaker in the corner. Everything looks lovely. I said. She smiled. I wanted this to feel different. It did, but not in the way she meant. We made small talk over salad. She asked if I'd read anything good lately. I mentioned a mystery novel from the library. She nodded, but didn't ask what it was about. Her eyes kept drifting toward the side table near the kitchen. That's when I saw it, another stack of papers. Clipped. Neat. Waiting. She didn't reach for them right away. She waited until we'd finished the main course rosemary chicken with rice pilaf. Delicious. Warm. A peace offering in culinary form. Then she exhaled. Just a little too carefully. And said, So, I talked to a friend who works in elder law. They said there's a simpler way to arrange things. Nothing binding. Really. Just provisional. Something to keep things smooth. She slid the folder across the table like it was a gift. I didn't touch it. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out a single folded document. I placed it gently on top of the stack she'd just offered. No words. Just paper meeting paper. Melissa blinked. Confused at first, then curious. She opened it. And as her eyes scanned the page, the confusion slid into something sharper. A quiet alarm. It was a legal notice of trust execution. Full control. Full transfer. No outside authority. No proxy. No loopholes. My name. Signed at the bottom in clean ink. Final. Enforceable. Irrevocable. I sipped my water. I appreciate your concern. I said, and I understand that life gets complicated. That planning is part of being responsible. She said nothing. I continued. But I've already taken care of mine. Her jaw tightened. Her thumb tapped the corner of the table once. Then stopped. Did someone help you with this? She asked. Yes. I said. A friend. Someone who understands what it means to prepare without pressure. The room fell quiet. She looked down. Then back up. Her face hadn't fully changed. But her eyes had. Something had cracked behind them, not broken. Not wounded, just exposed. She started to say something, but didn't finish. The words fell apart halfway up her throat. And that's when Joanne stepped in. She'd been watching from her car but saw enough. She knocked lightly, opened the door, and walked in with a grace that only older women seem to carry. She smiled at Melissa, offered a soft good evening, and then turned to me. Are we heading out? I nodded. Melissa stood, flustered but not angry. She tried to hold her smile like it was a vase already cracked. I didn't scold. I didn't explain. I just said forgiveness doesn't come with a key. Some doors close, and they need time before they can open again. If they open at all. We walked out into the night without saying goodbye. The wind had picked up. I could smell rain somewhere in the distance. But I wasn't cold. Because sometimes, peace doesn't come from reconciliation. It comes from recognizing your worth and walking away without asking for permission. The next morning, the air felt colder than the forecast had promised. One of those mornings where the light moves slower. Like even the sun isn't sure it wants to show up. I sat at the kitchen table in my slippers. Toast untouched. A glass of orange juice sweating beside me. My hands still felt warm from the night before. But inside my chest, something had closed itself off. Around 10:00 a.m. My phone buzzed. One message. One line. You made this harder than it had to be. No greeting. No name. Just that. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then set the phone down. Face down. And pushed my toast aside. The juice didn't look refreshing anymore. It looked sour. There was no follow-up text. No apology. No explanation. And I knew the message wasn't about disappointment. It was about control. About a door she thought would stay open forever. And now found shut. Later that afternoon, I walked out to the garage and started pulling down old boxes. One by one. I opened them, sorting. Tossing. Keeping. I found photo albums I hadn't touched in years. Christmas cards. Drawings from kindergarten. Snapshots of a little girl with a crooked ponytail holding up science fair ribbons. There was one photo I paused on. Melissa at age 5. Sitting in the snow. Cheeks pink. Clutching a toy fire truck and smiling so wide I could count the gaps in her teeth. I used to hold that smile in my memory like a talisman. Like a reason to bend. But now, when I looked at it, I saw something else. A child who always got what she wanted. And a mother who thought love meant always saying yes. That was the hardest part. Not the papers. Not the silence. But realizing that what I had offered in love had been received as leverage. That somehow, along the way, I had become less of a mother and more of a resource. And that was a grief no one warns you about. I moved 2 weeks later. Not far, just across town to a cottage closer to the coast, where the salt air hits the windows and the seabirds call before dawn. The house is older, smaller, the kind of place with uneven floorboards and a crooked mailbox. But it feels right. Not because it's perfect, but because it doesn't need me to be anything I'm not. I didn't bring much. Just what mattered. A framed photo of Thomas. A box of recipe cards. Smudged and bent. 3 quilts. A chipped blue kettle. And a ceramic owl from the garden that never scared a single bird. But always made me smile. Most mornings now, I walk to the library on Main Street. Not for books, necessarily, but because I like the sound of pages being turned around me. That's where I met them. Patricia, Deborah, Helen. Women with quiet eyes and strong backs. They didn't speak much at first, but neither did I. Over time, we started planting things behind the library. An old bed of dirt no one touched anymore. We called it the Quiet Patch. Tomatoes, basil, marigolds, lavender. We didn't talk much while we worked. Just dug, watered, wiped dirt from our palms. We didn't need to explain what we had lost, only that we still showed up. One Saturday, I saw a car I recognized parked down the street. Same color, same license plate frame. Melissa didn't get out. Just sat there, watching. She stayed for a few minutes. then pulled away. She didn't leave a note, didn't text. And that was okay. I've stopped waiting for what people don't know how to give. That night, I wrote a letter not to her, and not to Thomas. To myself? To the woman I used to be. The one who believed love meant self-erasure. The one who thought being quiet meant being safe. I told her she could stop holding everything alone now. That she could sit down. That she had carried enough. I tucked that letter between the pages of a book I no longer planned to finish. Because some stories don't need a proper ending. They just need release. Later that night, I baked a cake. Just one layer. Just for me. I lit a candle. Not for a birthday. Not for anyone else. Just because I could. And when I blew it out, I made one quiet wish that this peace, this stillness I had fought so hard for, would be enough. And it was.